It started with something as ordinary as checking the answering machine on a Tuesday evening in our quiet Indianapolis neighborhood. I had just gotten home from work, the sky still holding a little light over the tree-lined streets, and I was expecting a message from my mom about a family recipe she wanted to share. Instead, I heard a voice that did not belong to her. It was his coworker, Andrew Klein, leaving a message for my husband. The words were casual, almost friendly, but they carried a weight I was not prepared for. I stood in our small kitchen, my bag still on my shoulder, and listened to the entire thing twice before I let myself move. My name is Victoria Lang, and I'm 30 years old. My husband Daniel and I had been married for 4 years by then. We lived in a modest residential pocket of Indianapolis, the kind of neighborhood where people waved from driveways and kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on. I worked as a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized firm downtown. My husband worked in business development at a larger company across town. On paper, we looked stable. In reality, I had been carrying a quiet, growing sense that the life we were building was not entirely ours. My husband had always been drawn to status. Not in loud, flashy ways at first. It showed up in small comments over dinner. He would come home talking about how Andrew had closed another big deal and how the higher-ups were finally noticing him. He would say things like, Andrew understood the game, knew how to move fast, and was not afraid to take chances. Then he would look at me and add, almost as an afterthought, that my job was important too, but it was different, safer, more careful. I used to brush it off. I told myself he was just proud of his friend and tired from work. But the pattern had been building for years, one small dismissal at a time. That Tuesday evening, the voice message made the pattern impossible to ignore. Andrew's voice filled our kitchen, relaxed and confident. He talked about an investment opportunity they had been discussing, something that could move fast and give my husband the kind of visibility he had been wanting at work. Then he said the part that settled like cold water in my chest. He told my husband not to mention it to me yet. He said I would probably want to run every number and ask too many questions, and that by the time I was done, the window might close. He said my husband should trust him on this one, because they both knew it could be the thing that finally got him noticed. I did not cry. I did not call anyone right away. I stood there until the machine clicked off and the house was quiet again. Then I walked to the sink, filled a glass of water, and drank it slowly. My hands were steady. Inside, something had shifted, but I could not name it yet. I had spent so long being the steady one, the one who budgeted carefully and thought through every angle, that hearing myself described as an obstacle felt both familiar and newly painful. I replayed the message one more time. Not because I needed to hear the words again, but because I wanted to be sure I had not misunderstood. The tone was not angry or secretive in a dramatic way. It was the tone of two people who had already decided something together and were simply managing the details. My husband had not told me about any investment. We had a joint savings account we both contributed to, and we had talked about using part of it for a down payment on a slightly larger place in a couple of years. Nothing had been said about risky moves or quick flips. Nothing had been said about keeping me out of the conversation. I put the glass in the dishwasher and went upstairs to change out of my work clothes. Our bedroom was small but tidy. The bed was still made from the morning. I sat on the edge of it and looked at the framed photo on the dresser. It was from our wedding, both of us smiling, the light soft and warm. I remembered how my husband had talked that day about building a life where we would not have to worry about money, the way our parents had. He had said it with such certainty. I had believed him. That night, he came home later than usual. He said the meeting with Andrew had run long. I asked how his day was, the way I always did. He told me it was fine, nothing special, just the usual push to hit numbers. He did not mention any investment. He did not mention his coworker's name at all. I listened and nodded in the right places. When he asked about my day, I said it had been steady, which was true. I did not tell him about the message. I was not ready to hear what he would say. I needed to understand what was actually happening first. The next morning, I went to work as usual. I sat at my desk and went through reports, but my mind kept returning to the kitchen and that voice on the machine. During lunch, I stepped outside and called my close friend, Emma Torres. We had known each other since college. She worked in human resources at another company and had a way of seeing things clearly without making everything feel like a crisis. I told her I needed to talk, but did not want to do it over the phone. She suggested we meet at a small cafe near her office after work. It was not a big plan, just coffee and a chance to say the words out loud to someone who would not try to fix it before I had finished speaking. We sat at a corner table by the window. The cafe was quiet that afternoon, only a few other people scattered at tables. I told Emma about the message, repeating it as closely as I could remember. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said it sounded like more than just a business decision. It sounded like my husband and his coworker had already decided I was someone to work around rather than someone to work with. She asked if there had been other moments like that, smaller ones I might have set aside. I told her there had been many. The comments about Andrew being the one who got things done. The way my husband would light up when he talked about work wins that did not include me. The subtle pressure to present a certain version of our life to his colleagues, even when it stretched what we could comfortably afford. Emma did not tell me to confront him immediately. She said I deserved to know the full picture before I decided what came next. She suggested I look at our shared accounts, not because she assumed the worst, but because clarity is not the same as accusation. I thanked her. We finished our coffee and walked to our cars together. She gave me a hug before we left and told me to call if I needed anything, even if it was just to sit in silence for a while. I drove home in the early evening traffic, the sky turning soft over the city. When I got inside, I set my bag down and went straight to the small desk in the corner of the living room where we kept the laptop we used for bills and shared emails. We had a joint account for household things, and we both had access. I logged in and started scrolling through recent messages, not looking for anything specific, just looking. Most of it was ordinary, a confirmation for the electric bill, a newsletter from a store. Then I saw an email from Andrew to my husband, sent 2 days earlier. The subject line was simple. Re that opportunity we discussed. I almost closed the laptop without opening it. Part of me wanted to pretend I had not seen it. But I clicked. The message was short and direct. Andrew was confirming details about the investment, including how much they planned to move and when. He wrote that they should keep the timeline tight so there would be less time for questions later. He added that once it was done, my husband could frame it at work as his own initiative, the kind of bold move that gets noticed. There was a line near the bottom that made my stomach tighten. It said, "She doesn't need the details until it's already working. You know how she is." I read the email 3 times. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the chair without turning on any lights. The room grew darker around me. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and the occasional car passing on the street outside. I did not feel angry in the way I expected. I felt a deep, steady sadness, mixed with something clearer. For years, I had been patient, telling myself that my husband's need for recognition was just part of who he was, and that my role was to support it. I had believed that patience was the same as love. Now I was sitting in our living room, realizing that patience had also been a way of avoiding a truth I did not want to face. I stayed there for a long time. I did not call anyone. I did not write anything down. I simply let the quiet of the house settle around the new information. Tomorrow I would meet with Michael Reed, the financial advisor I had used for a couple of years for my own retirement planning. I would ask him calmly and without drama what our options were if I needed to understand exactly where our shared money stood and how to protect the part that was mine. I would not accuse. I would not raise my voice. I would simply gather what I needed to make a clear decision about what came next. Outside, the streetlights came on one by one. Inside, I remained still. The marriage I had been living in was not the same as the one I had thought I was building. That realization did not arrive with fireworks or shouting. It arrived in the quiet space between a voice message I was never meant to hear and an email I was never meant to see. I did not know yet what I would do with it. I only knew that I could not unknow it. The next morning, the light came through the kitchen window the same way it always did, but nothing else felt the same. I poured coffee into the same mug I used every day and sat at the table for a few minutes before I left for my appointment with Michael Reed. I had known him for a couple of years through work referrals, and he had always been steady and direct without trying to push me toward any particular choice. That morning, I needed exactly that kind of steadiness. I met him at his small office on the north side of the city, a quiet space with simple furniture and a view of a few trees outside the window. He pulled up our shared accounts on his screen and walked me through them line by line. There had been no large withdrawals yet, but there were inquiries and partial transfers that matched the timeline from the message and the email I had found. A few $1,000s had been moved into a separate holding account my husband and I rarely used, labeled only with a vague note about opportunity funds. Michael did not speculate about motives. He simply showed me the dates and amounts and asked what I wanted to do next. I told him I wanted clarity and protection for the portion of the savings that came from my own paychecks and the retirement contributions I had built on my own. He nodded and explained how we could open a new account in my name, only move my direct deposits there going forward, and document everything carefully in case conversations with my husband became more complicated. He also suggested I speak with a family law attorney, not because he assumed the worst, but because understanding my options would help me stay calm no matter what happened next. I thanked him. We scheduled a follow-up for the following week, and I left his office feeling heavier, but clearer than I had in a long time. On the drive back, I thought about the years I had spent supporting my husband's image of success without questioning whether that image included me as an equal partner. He had always spoken about Andrew with a kind of admiration that felt different from how he spoke about me. Andrew was bold. Andrew closed deals. Andrew understood timing and risk. My contributions were described as careful, reliable, sometimes even a little too cautious for the bigger picture. I had told myself it was just the way men talked about their work friends, that it did not mean anything about how he saw our marriage. Now those small comments lined up with the voice on the machine and the words in the email, and I could no longer pretend they were harmless. That evening, my husband came home around the usual time. He set his bag down in the hallway and came into the kitchen where I was finishing dinner. He talked about his day the way he often did, mentioning a meeting that had gone well and how Andrew had been pushing for even bigger targets next quarter. He said Andrew believed they were both on the edge of something that could change how the company saw them. Then he looked at me and added that he wanted us to think about stepping up our own lifestyle a little, maybe looking at a nicer car in the next year or two, so we would not feel behind when his colleagues talked about their families. He said it lightly, as if it were a shared dream, rather than a new pressure. I set the plates on the table and sat down across from him. I told him I thought we should review our budget and our shared goals together before making any decisions about cars or moves. I kept my voice even. He smiled in the way he did when he thought I was being overly practical, and said Andrew had told him not to overthink these things, that opportunities like the one they were looking at did not wait for perfect spreadsheets. He reached for his water glass and changed the subject to something lighter, about a coworker's new baby. I let the conversation move on. I did not push. I ate my dinner and asked about his weekend plans the way I always did. Inside, the decision I had been carrying since the night before settled into something solid. Later, after he had gone upstairs to watch something on his phone, I stayed in the living room with the lights low. I opened my laptop again and looked at the shared email account one more time, not searching for new evidence, but simply confirming what I already knew. The pattern was consistent. My husband had chosen to build parts of our future with his coworkers' advice and approval, rather than with mine. He had let his coworker shape the story of what our money and our risks should be, while treating my questions as obstacles to the image he wanted to project at work and among his colleagues. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet for a while. I thought about calling Emma, but I did not want to unload the same weight on her twice in 2 days. Instead, I wrote a short list on a piece of paper of the things I needed to do in the next few days: move my direct deposit, gather the statements Michael had recommended, and schedule one conversation with a family law attorney to understand what separation of assets would actually look like if it came to that. I did not write the word divorce. I was not ready to name it yet. I only knew I could not continue building a life where my voice was managed rather than heard. The next evening, I would tell my husband what I had found. I would do it calmly with the facts in front of me, without raising my voice or turning it into a fight. I would ask him to explain why he and his coworker had decided I did not need to know about decisions that affected both of us. I would listen to whatever he said. Then I would decide what came after that. The house was still and ordinary around me. The street outside had gone quiet. I folded the piece of paper and put it in my bag. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my own patience lifting, not in anger, but in a quiet, steady recognition that I had been carrying more than my share of our story for a long time. I went upstairs, brushed my teeth, and got into bed beside my husband. He was already asleep, his breathing even. I lay awake for a while longer, watching the shadows move across the ceiling from the streetlight outside. I did not know exactly how the conversation the next evening would end. I only knew that whatever happened, I would not let it erase the clarity I had finally allowed myself to hold. The truth had arrived in small, ordinary ways: an unexpected voice on a machine, an email sent to the wrong inbox, a meeting with a steady advisor, and it was not going to leave again. The next evening arrived more quickly than I expected. I came home from work, changed into comfortable clothes, and started making dinner the way I always had. My husband walked in a little after 6, set his bag down, and asked how my day had been. I told him it had been fine, and asked about his. He mentioned another meeting with Andrew, and how they were still looking at that opportunity, though the timeline had shifted a little. He sounded hopeful, the way he always did when he talked about work moves that could raise his standing. I finished plating the food and sat across from him at our small kitchen table. I waited until we had both eaten a few bites. Then I spoke in the same calm tone I used at work when presenting a report. I told him I had listened to a voice message from Andrew that had been left on our home machine. I told him I had seen an email that had landed in our shared inbox. I told him I had met with my financial advisor and moved my direct deposits into an account in my name only. I said I was not angry, but I needed him to understand that I would not continue making decisions about our shared life while he and his coworker discussed them without me. He set his fork down slowly. For a moment he looked surprised, then his expression shifted into the one he used when he thought I was being too cautious. He said it was just business talk, the kind of conversation men had at work all the time. Andrew was only trying to help him move faster toward the kind of recognition he had been working for. He said I had always been the careful one, and that sometimes careful people slowed down opportunities that could benefit both of us. He added that he had planned to tell me once everything was already in motion, so I would not have to worry about the details. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I asked him one question. I asked why he had felt it was acceptable to move money we both contributed to without telling me, and why his first instinct had been to keep his coworker's advice closer than mine. He looked away for a second, then said Andrew understood the pressure he was under to look successful among the people he worked with. He said our life together was important, but sometimes a man needed to make bold moves to provide the future he wanted his wife to have. The word provide landed between us like something he had rehearsed. I told him I had already spoken with a family law attorney named Patricia Hale. I said I had no intention of fighting or making scenes. I simply needed time and space to decide what our marriage could look like when both people were allowed to know the full picture. I told him I would stay in the house for the next 2 weeks while I looked for a small place of my own. I would continue to handle my half of the bills until everything was settled. Then I stood up, cleared my plate, and went upstairs to the bedroom we still shared. He stayed at the table for a long time. I could hear him moving around the kitchen later, but he did not come upstairs to argue. That night, we slept on opposite sides of the bed, without speaking. Over the next several days, the opportunity my husband and Andrew had been protecting began to unravel on its own. A key contact pulled out. The numbers that had looked promising on paper shifted when the market moved slightly. Andrew sent a follow-up email that accidentally copied someone higher up at their company, and questions started circulating about whose judgment had been involved. My husband came home one evening looking tired in a way I had not seen before. He did not mention Andrew's name. He did not talk about bold moves or status. He simply said work had been difficult and went to bed early. I did not ask for details. The truth was revealing itself without any effort from me. 2 weeks later, I moved into a small one-bedroom apartment a few blocks away in the same quiet neighborhood. I packed my clothes, my books, and the few pieces of furniture that were mine before the marriage. I left the framed wedding photo on the dresser and took only the pictures from trips we had taken together that still felt like mine. My husband was at work when I left. I wrote a short note and left it on the kitchen table. It said I would be in touch through our attorneys about the final division of accounts, and that I wished him well. I did not say I was sorry. I did not say I hoped we could fix it. I closed the door behind me and drove the short distance to the new place with the windows down and the radio off. In the weeks that followed, I kept my routine steady. I went to work, met with Patricia Hale when paperwork needed signing, and had dinner with Emma once a week at the same quiet cafe where we had first talked. I started seeing a therapist who helped me name the pattern I had lived inside for years without calling it by its real name. My husband texted a few times, mostly about practical things at first, then once about whether we could meet for coffee to talk. I replied that I was not ready, and that any conversation should happen with our attorneys present if it concerned money or the marriage. He did not push. The status he had chased at work had taken a quiet hit, and I heard through mutual acquaintances that Andrew was no longer the golden example my husband had once described. The damage spread without my involvement. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt the clean, steady relief of having stopped carrying weight that was never mine to hold alone. There are still nights when I lie awake in the new apartment and feel the absence of the life I thought we were building. I do not miss the pressure to smile at work events or the small comments that made my careful nature sound like a flaw. I miss the version of us that existed before I understood how much of our story had been shaped without my voice. That loss is real, and it does not disappear just because I made the right choice for myself. Some evenings, I sit at my small kitchen table with a cup of tea and let the feeling sit beside me without trying to fix it. The belonging I once felt to the idea of us is gone, and I am learning to live with the empty space it left without filling it with regret or anger. I chose myself on an ordinary evening in our old kitchen when I told my husband what I knew and what I would no longer accept. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw accusations or demand explanations that would change nothing. I simply stated the facts I had gathered and the boundary I was drawing. That choice cost me the marriage I had believed in and the daily presence of the person I had once trusted most. It also gave me back the ability to make decisions about my own money, my own future, and my own worth, without first checking whether they fit someone else's image of success. The truth had been there all along, in small dismissals and private conversations I was never meant to hear. It simply needed me to stop being patient long enough to see it clearly. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping your own voice, I would like to know what you did. Leave a comment below and let me know how you handled it. If this story stayed with you, Please like and subscribe so others who need to hear it can find it too.